You're listening to Remotely One, a podcast that educates, entertains, and inspires you to take your life back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a former beer rep who left the warehouse to become a voice actor and digital creator.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds awesome. Let's clock in. Am I on the T in Boston? What was that?
That was, yeah.
Get more square.
I know. That was remote work in action.
Yeah.
My doorbell is
Copley.
ringing, and my child is not answering it. You know?
Oh,
Get
no.
the door, damn it, I'm on a podcast!
That's how it works. And I don't even know who that is. That's somebody trying to deliver something.
Are you wearing a Prince shirt?
No, it's a Go-Go's shirt.
That's pretty cool.
Go-Go's.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 'cause I'm old.
Wow. All it's a
That's-
field.
Totally.
What?
Pay no mind
Yeah.
to what they say.
Mhm.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter anyway.
Exactly.
We're the same age, Rachel, so don't call us old. Don't call
Well,
us old.
exactly.
We're the same age.
One of my colleagues said, "Oh, that's a nice graphic tee," and I'm like, "It's not a graphic tee. It's a Go-Go's T-shirt. They were inducted into the Hall of Fame." He looked at me
Yes.
blankly.
I went to a concert with, my daughter. She's 10, and my partner, and she. I see all these unbelievable shirts. I see this Nirvana, like the original Nirvana shirt. It's all like faded, and I was like, "Wow!" I walked up to the kid. I was like, "Yo, I love that shirt, man." I was like, "You like Nirvana?" And he was like, "Who?" And then I walked away. I was like, "Oh." And then my wife, she's like, "Kaleem, they sell those shirts at Walmart now." And I was like, "Oh my God. What are they called? Vintage. They're vintage shirts."
Exactly.
Welcome back to Remotely One. I'm your co-host, Rick Haney, joined by my esteemed colleague, Kaleem Clarkson. Hey, bud.
Shoot up.
Get back, baby!
McGavin.
Shooter! Hey, everybody. Since you know how to find us, do us a huge favor. Go to ratethispodcast.com/remotely one. Just leave us a review. Not too much to ask, right? If you could do that, we would love you for it. Since 2015, Remotely One has been one of the largest communities of remote work professionals, with over 3,000 Slack members and 5,000 email subscribers. That can't be the right numbers. We are growing too fast.
Number. We got there.
You're growing up so fast, son. It's free to join. Go check it out at remotely1.com. And with that housekeeping business out of the way, Kaleem, give us a teaser too about today's guest.
Oh, gosh.
Are you nervous again? I have a feeling
Yeah.
you're nervous again.
No way.
Yes, I am nervous because every person we've had on guest Rick, they're just better than me. And it just makes me nervous. It makes me like, I don't know,
I understand.
sweat. And today's guest is no different. Yes.
Yep. Okay, shake it off.
So today's guests, they are originally born in LA, Los Angeles. Okay.
The left coast.
Yep,
Yep.
on the left coast. They are now a resident of New York City.
Ooh, New York.
Yes.
All
yep.
right.
Okay. And they are a graduate from the University of Chicago.
Ooh,
Few learnings.
few learnings.
Go Bears. Go Bears. And
Bears.
this is something interesting. Our guests, they really love roller coasters, specifically the Cyclone on Coney Island. Guest, how many times you been on the Cyclone, guest? How many times?
Oh, I don't know if I can count, because you can go there and just go on it over and over, which is worth doing.
Oh, my God.
Now, the
like-
reason why she likes it is because it's clickety-clackety old school and kind of feel like you might not make it back. That's why she really enjoys that roller
It's
coaster.
so old, it's run by a giant hamster wheel. That's how old it is.
The OG of roller coasters. Let's see, what else?
That's right.
Oh, they are passionate about financial wellness, which we're going to talk a lot about today, Rick.
Ooh, I'm excited for that.
They are a former VP at Merrill Lynch.
That's big time.
Yeah, just doing a few things. Oh, and then their extra time, they're an author. They wrote a book called The Financial Diaries, which is about the financial lives of working Americans. Our guest today is the founder and CEO of Canary. Listeners and viewers, please give a warm welcome to Rachel Schneider.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you.
She's killing it. Crowd sell down. Crowd sell your ass down.
Okay, people, let's be quiet.
All right.
Quiet down, people.
Woo.
That was so fun. I want to come on this podcast every day. I've never had an entrance like
We
that.
wish you could.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, that's our goal. Our goal is to be people's hype people as they walk out on stage. So your next TEDx talk, Rick and I will introduce you.
Fantastic. I can't wait.
Your next TED Talk. Wow, is there one scheduled?
No.
Oh, okay.
But, based on that intro, I feel like I've accomplished a lot, so I'm good.
Oh, you certainly have. Let's dive into it, shall we? Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about your something I plucked off of your LinkedIn page. It's blue sky ideas and making them real. And for some reason, that really spoke to me. And as I dug in more, I started to really understand where you were going with that. So how much of that mindset led you to all the things that you're doing today? And did you ever have like an aha moment where you're like, all right, this is where I'm going. This is what I want to do?
Such a good question. I wish I could say yes. I think it was more a windy path for me to figure out what to do. So I was always interested in financial things. My parents were some of the all-time best in terms of teaching about financial things. I think for a lot of people, financial wellness is sort of taboo. Nobody talks about, how mortgages work at the dinner table. But my family really did. Like, there was a lot of talk about what's a mortgage and how do you save for the future. And my mom did this great thing where she matched our savings. Like, if I got $10 for my birthday and I put in my savings account, she would double it, right? So they were always trying to make it fun to think about the long term and your financial future, and always trying to make sure we were educated about financial concepts. So it wasn't surprising when I then made a life that was about financial health. And I would say a lot of my career sort of goes back to my first formative professional experience, where I worked with a low-income population, migrant farm workers, and my job was to talk with folks about education. It was so sort of emotionally big for me to sit in people's living rooms and have them just spill out their life stories and what their big challenges were. That sort of set me on this path of let's think about how money interacts with what people really want to accomplish in their lives and how we can make it easier for them.
So you went to school at University of Chicago. What really got you involved in the research that you ended up doing? And then, if I'm not mistaken, some of that led to your book. Can you talk a little bit about about that? Like, what got you motivated in higher ed? Because those first few years for a lot of people are really difficult. Like, you don't know what it is that you want to do. So how did that kind of play the route?
I'm definitely in that category, right? So I did a JD MBA at University of Chicago. It was after I had done the work I just mentioned, where I was working with migrant farm workers. So I went into grad school really passionate about poverty alleviation and economic mobility and how can you help people build a better and bigger life for themselves. Then I spent 4 years in grad school and came out of there pretty confused about what I should do, and went and was an investment banker for a bunch of years. It's sort of the exact opposite of what I had done before grad school. It took me a little while to return to what my original interest was. So I liked investment banking in some ways, in that it was a great learning experience. I worked really hard. You just see a lot pretty quickly. Then I really wanted to be able to combine this knowledge about financial matters with helping people day to day. And so I spent about 10 years working at a nonprofit called the Financial Health Network. And that's where I did the research that you're talking about, the Financial Diaries. And Financial Health Network is really all about how do we build the financial health and well-being of Americans, particularly those who are struggling. And we were really focused on what are the actual day-to-day problems people experience. And so, a data point that I became really motivated around is one lots of people have heard now, which is that almost half of Americans can't easily pay for a $400 expense. So I was really passionate about, okay, well, what are those moments when somebody's short end up meaning in their lives, right? My car broke down, or my rent is due and I don't have the money. And then what happens? That I became really passionate about how do we solve that problem. And so Canary really comes out of the research that I did around that problem, and the idea that the best thing to do in that moment is get somebody the money. right? Like, what they most need in that moment is, I need money to solve this near-term problem. And so Canary is really about helping employers to set up emergency funds for their employees so that when they experience that moment of crisis, they have somewhere to go and they feel like their employer has their back and their colleagues have their back.
That's amazing. You talk about your parents' influence and teaching you a lot about, finance. Having known that, was there something that an experience or a personal moment that you may have had where you became more interested in helping people with that knowledge? Or was it just something that kind of evolved?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, from your family, right? Like, you were being taught that stuff. So, like, what made you want to help people?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think I just always felt really lucky. Like, I grew up in a super easy way, right? My parents had stable jobs. My dad was a dentist. My mom was at home with me and my sister for a while and then went back to school and became a social worker. She was a therapist. And, I don't know, maybe I was raised with a really strong sense that we were fortunate, right? That of course, like, our financial security was the result of my parents' hard work. They had made a lot of good choices, but it was also really obviously the result of some luck, right? As it is with everybody. Like, there's always some element of smart, hardworking, in the right place at the right time. And I think I always knew that. And so then when I was thinking about how to craft a life that would feel meaningful and useful, I was pretty focused on how you share that, how you help more people to feel that.
Good parents. How about that?
Yeah, let's say good parents.
Yeah, sometimes that's really all that you need, really. I mean,
yeah, Ma. Yeah, Dad. Well done. Well done. Like, listen, you can help. Listen, we're fortunate. There are less fortunate people in the world.
Yeah.
So go out and just, help people. Don't be an asshole, basically.
Right.
And she did the right thing. She did the right thing.
They really did.
Right.
Yeah. And now, I don't know if you guys have paid attention to this research at all, but there's really good data that says you will be happiest if you anchor your life on helping others. Like, it's just relevant to your own well-being. There's this really interesting research around loneliness, right? And so we have a national epidemic of loneliness. People are very sad and alone. And the thing that helps with loneliness most isn't having somebody come visit the lonely person. It's asking the lonely person to go do something for somebody else.
Yes.
And I just think, so I don't know, I'd love to say it's all like, I just was raised with really great values. I also think I've personally experienced that your life is really satisfying if you organize it around being helpful.
Have you ever heard of Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn or any of those types of motivational speakers?
No.
They, back in the 80s and 90s, they were really into the whole network marketing scene. But, Zig Ziglar was the one who said, you can have anything you want in life if you help enough people get what they want. Mm-hmm. And that always struck me like, that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? It's living a life of servitude. Serving others is incredibly fulfilling, and you do it. And you don't expect anything back, but you always get something out of it.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, we're here for the kids. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right.
Exactly. Right. That's exactly right. And it could be funny also.
Right. We're here to help to keep the kids off the street. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's what we're doing. Right. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Can you walk us up to the point where Canary was conceptualized and, what led to that, but also at what point did you decide that remote life was for you?
Yeah, very good questions. So I've had the good fortune of having a remote life for a long time relative to lots of folks. So I was an independent consultant for a while in between being an investment banker and going to the Financial Health Network. So of course I got to work wherever I wanted. And it was a dream. It was like a dream several years in terms of like the flexibility of when and where I worked. And I accomplished a ton. I was so productive in those few years. Then when I went to work at the Financial Health Network, I was really the first New York-based employee of a Chicago-based organization. So we didn't even talk about it as working remotely. We didn't know those words. It was long enough ago that it was just they were making an accommodation to let me live in New York and like experimenting with, can we make it work to not have everybody be in the same place? So it always was a natural to me but as a result, like I did see what works and what doesn't work. We had people all over the country by the time I left, and that was pre-pandemic. And it gets complicated. And Canary is a remote first organization. So you don't have office space at all. Like lots of startups, we've been growing up by hiring people wherever they live. So it's really, really delighted to talk more about that experience. Along the way, in parallel, what happened, the way I ended up starting Canary is that, so I was doing this research. I was very excited about, like it's fun to be a thought leader, right? So I wrote a book. I wandered around the country talking about it. But I had also reached a point in my own career, my own personal progression where I wanted to be more tangible in what I was doing. I had lived in the world of research and ideas for about 10 years, and I wanted to build something that helped the people that I was researching about I was researching about people's financial challenges. I wanted to build something that would actually help more directly. And I was really focused on this idea of there being moments in people's lives where they're short. And those moments can be the difference between an upward or a downward trajectory, right?
Can you give us an example? Can you give us an example? What do you mean?
Yeah, so the story we often tell in the financial health space is, somebody's car breaks down. They don't have money to fix it. For lack of the money to fix the car, they start showing up to work late. And they're taking an Uber to work. Now they're behind, they're less productive than they were because they're just distracted and unable to have control over their schedule. They're worried, they're scared that they aren't going to be able to fix their car, and now what? So that also affects productivity. We know financial stress is a huge drag on productivity.
Yep.
And in the meantime, they're taking Ubers to work and racking up debt. And so at some point you either lose your job or you have to take out a loan that's really expensive to pay for the car repair. Here was this moment that was a $400 moment or a $1,000 moment. And it has this long tail.
Yes.
We know from some national research that in any given year, about 60% of people experience some kind of economic shock, right? Something happens in your life. Somebody in your household loses a job, earns less than they thought they would, lives in the path of a hurricane, fill in the blank, right? And for about half of those people, no big deal, right? So 30% of Americans experience that shock and keep moving. But 30% of Americans say a year later, they're still dealing with some financial repercussions from that shock. Wow. And then, some smaller percentage, those repercussions are really meaningful for them. And, they end up in a spiral of high cost loans, or spending down all of their savings, or even worse, getting evicted, having utilities turned off. So those are the kinds of things we were uncovering in the Financial Diaries research, was the way that people experience volatility in their financial life. And sometimes that volatility causes really significant problems for people.
Wow. So your thought was during that time when you were finding this research, because somebody has to do that. And a lot of times, people would be like, oh, well, go to welfare, go to a, supported thing. It's kind of leading into my next question. You actually were like, well, the companies could actually help in this case. Like for them to pay out $1,000 could help. So could you talk about how your platform works? Is it do companies just put money aside and basically how does that work?
Yeah. So I wish I could take credit for having had the idea. But what happened is I was talking about this issue. So one of the talks I gave at the time was at Walmart. Their HR team and their financial services team and their foundation had paid attention to the Diaries research. And so they invited me down to Bentonville to give a talk. And I was ending every talk with something about this, that we needed a way to get people the money that they need when they need it. And afterwards, somebody from their foundation came up to me and said, we do that. And it turns out Walmart has this multi-million-dollar fund. If you work at Walmart and you experience a crisis, you can go and request help. And that set me down this path. So they ended up giving me, and this was also during a hardcore remote work period for me, because I was no longer working for the Financial Health Network. I was working for the Aspen Institute, which is a think tank based in DC. And Walmart gave me a grant to go and research best practices around how employers are doing this work today. So Walmart's not alone. Starbucks, Home Depot, Target, I could go down a long list, have funds like this in place where if you work for them and you experience a crisis, you can go and request help. And so I assembled, on the remote work theme, a team of people. We had a team of people in Boston. We had some people in DC. We had me in New York. And we did research about how employers were doing this work.
So Canary started off remote. Canary was remote for us from the very beginning, kind of following your higher ed, because in research, you're kind of working with people all over the country as a researcher. So you just kind of continued that, right?
Exactly. We were really used to it. And at the time, I wasn't sure that Canary was going to be a company. I thought maybe it's a research effort. Maybe it's, but I knew I wanted to grow this practice. So a lot of large companies have put programs in place to be able to do grants for their employees. But often those programs aren't super well publicized internally at the company. Right? So I guarantee you could walk into one of the locations of any of those companies and ask people about this, and they might or might not know that their company has this in place. I also thought smaller companies aren't going to be able to build this infrastructure themselves. And there's a lot of value to having a third party be part of it, right? So you as an employee maybe don't want to go to your boss or your HR leader and say, I'm about to be evicted. I need some help, right? But to be able to go to Canary and say that really preserves your dignity at the workplace. Right? At work, you want to show up with your best foot forward. You don't want to say, I'm sleeping in my car.
Is it anonymous or no?
It's not anonymous to us because we are then going back and forth with the individual, understanding their situation, making sure that they meet the guidelines to receive a grant. But we don't report any of that information back to the company.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really a dignified experience then for the employee. Yeah, and you had asked, what's the basic mechanics here? What's going on is really we're facilitating a charitable activity that a company donates money to a nonprofit called the Canary Impact Lab, and that money is earmarked for if employees at our company experience a crisis, and it has to be that they've experienced something unpredictable, unavoidable, and that they can't pay for basic living expenses as a result. So our job is to make sure that the individual applying meets those criteria and is treated with really a huge amount of care. And that's what we're doing.
Such a great idea.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Such a great idea. And it's shocking to hear that, too, because I remember it hasn't been that long ago where college where you're like, oh, man, like we're short, and then even as you get older, in your late 20s, early 30s, it's easy for something that the car is a perfect example. How many times did the hoopty's muffler come off? And in the Northeast, you have inspections. So every single time you go and get an inspection, that's a solid $750. That's $750 of cash that's got to come from somewhere. And you're like, damn. And just thinking like how companies, just a little bit of money, and the fact that it's anonymous from the company side, that was really, really smart. That's interesting. Kudos to you all.
It's really powerful. And, I think there's something really important here around community, around when I was first doing this work and we were just doing research, shouldn't just say in the research phase here, it was pre-pandemic. And so I was traveling a lot and, I chit chat with people. And I remember being in one taxi on my way to the airport where, the driver asked me what I do. And he immediately said, oh, this place I worked used to do that. And that's often the response I get. Like, oh, I worked in this place, and when somebody had a problem, we would take up collection. Like, often it's informal, right? Like, in the Diaries research, what we saw a lot of was somebody would have a crisis, and their neighbors would all host a potluck. Or their neighbors would all take up, like, they'd be like, well, so-and-so had a fire, like, who's got baby clothes, right? Like, this behavior of helping each other is just informally, it's just what humans do. We do it for each other. And it often takes place in the workplace. Like somebody will have a GoFundMe and distribute it around, right? And so I really think what we're trying to do is formalize this informal activity and make it a more robust, equitable part of a company's culture. Because when it's informal, there's a lot of value to that. It can feel really warm. People really like helping each other, as we talked about. But there's also, the people who have the most social capital are going to get the most help. Like the extroverts are going to get helped. The people with a lot of, with a known problem. But lots of people don't want to tell other people what their hardship is.
Of course. No. Private. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So I think what we're doing is trying to bring some more equity to this practice also.
Oh, outstanding.
Yeah.
Power.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to make it the case that all companies set up a fund for their people. So that's the goal.
You hear that? Run on over to Canary. Run on over to Canary if you want to keep that ish confidential. Check them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thinking like a business can sometimes help solve a societal issue that's, sustainable. Can you talk a little bit about social entrepreneurship and maybe explain what that term means for our audience?
Ooh, you stole that question, Rick. That's a good one.
That is a good question. So I'm sure there's a better definition, but I think of social entrepreneurship as when you bring all of everything we love about entrepreneurship, right? The creativity, the like willingness to take risks, the desire to find, to make something big and successful. You try and bring that urge, and often we think about entrepreneurship as a private sector thing, but it's certainly not only a private sector thing. But in our case, we think about it as, can you bring all of that energy of entrepreneurship into solving a social problem? Wow. And I do think that's the category of business that we're in, that we're social entrepreneurs. So we started as a for-profit. Our goal is we charge an administrative fee to a company for managing this for them. And the reason I started as a for-profit was really so that we could be as entrepreneurially as possible. We wanted to be able to grow. We want to be able to attract great people. And we want to bring the urgency that often comes with having a bottom line that you've got to satisfy. So
social entrepreneurship, shout out SE. That's actually one of my master classes. I took that, and it's fascinating because the idea of it being sustainable, I think a lot of times people look at nonprofits, once you get that .org, they believe that you're just depending on donations. And then a lot of charities kind of fall into that a little bit and kind of lose that edge to like, okay, how are we going to design a program that's actually going to support itself? I just absolutely love the drive to identify the problem, and a problem that's solvable too. Like, I mean, it's $700 for my hoopty to get fixed is not a big deal.
Right.
So yeah, I really, really, really enjoy it. So I have a question kind of bouncing off that a little bit. So you started off as remote first, just because for a lot of people that aren't in higher ed, researchers, they are remote workers. They work with people all over the country, so they're used to it. Yeah. So what role do you kind of see remote work playing in solving these societal problems? Earlier this year, I had a chance to work with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. They decided to go fully remote first. There's a lot of headlines of everyone returning to the office, but there aren't that many headlines of nonprofits, small businesses understanding that those expenses could be used for something else. So I guess my question to you is, do you see remote work continuously playing a role in social entrepreneurship or social challenges?
Yeah, I really do. I'm thinking as you ask that question, how does it compare to how I think remote work is going to continue to be a strong trend within other kinds of work? But I certainly think, and I'm thinking about our team at Canary, and we have folks all over the country, and they're drawn to work with us because they're really committed to the mission. And
it's that word value again.
Yeah, like they're really committed to the mission. And maybe in one way to think about it is, at the moment, we pay like a startup, right? So like everyone who works for us could make more money elsewhere, period, right? Like they could all go work for more established companies and they'd have greater job security and higher salaries. Mm-hmm. So what do we offer in exchange for them taking this risk, right? They're taking a pretty big risk on working with such an early stage company. It's really hard work. What we can offer in exchange is really seeing and valuing them as people, and part of that means people need to be able to live and work where they want to live and work. And I know you've talked about it, and I was listening to some of your other episodes. It's really about giving people the flexibility to work when and how they work most productively. And I know from my own personal experience how much that made a difference for me, right? When my kids were little, I had so much flexibility, and I was often online at night, but I was able to be at music class with a toddler during the day.
Yes.
And it just really worked for me. I really delivered during those years. Like, I know I did. I delivered a lot of really high quality work that I would not have been able to deliver in the same way if I hadn't had so much freedom. So I think that's a theme for everyone. And maybe it's even more true for those of us in the social entrepreneurship world, where what we're really giving people is meaning and purpose. Like, that's the goal here, right?
I think that's true with everything.
I think so too.
At the end of the day, what else do you have?
Yeah, I feel that way too. Like so I did spend 7 years doing investment banking at Merrill Lynch. And I remember so clearly interviewing for that job. And one of the people on the hiring committee said, if you're just here for the money, it won't be enough. And I remember thinking in my jaded, 25-year-old brain, Like, you
Yep.
guys make a lot of money. I think it's possible.
And it will be enough.
I think it's possible that when we're talking about the amount of money that you guys make, maybe that's like enough.
Money does buy happiness. Money does buy happiness.
Maybe. But you know what? I actually think that the people who were best at that job were the people, and I was in a telecom M&A group. The people who were best at it were people who were really geared up about the future of the telecommunications industry and who was going to win and which companies had the best strategy. Like, those were the people who like really thrived, right? Because it was for them about more than the money. They cared about the content. They made relationships with, they were true advisors, right? They made relationships with their clients and were true advisors because they really cared. And it was about building something bigger. It wasn't only about the money, right?
Yeah,
So I think this feeling is true for most of us, maybe everybody. Like, you need to think what you do matters to somebody.
As far as the clients you serve, have you had any kind of data to see between the companies that you're working with that are remote versus the companies that are not remote, and whether those funds are either, I guess first question is the size of the fund in relation to the size of the company, and then are you seeing usage more from remote companies versus on-site companies? Like, what's the impact of remote work when you're talking about, financial giving from a corporation?
Yeah, I love that question. It's so important. So I don't think we have the data yet, but this is what I think based on what I know about our client base. The actual usage of the emergency fund is going to be relatively low, and you hope it will be, right? You hope not that many people will have a true crisis every year and come ask for help. But we know that companies, that all employees benefit from and really care about knowing that their company is the kind of company who would have a fund like this in place, right? So there's this broader claim you're making to all your people. We have each other's back. We have your back. We care. And I think that claim is really important to back up with action. And in the remote environment, you have to work, you know this better than I do. In the remote environment, you have to work a lot harder to make sure people feel connected to each other. And you've got to come up with ways that that connection is tangible, that don't involve, snacks in the break room. And so my hypothesis is that having an emergency fund in place is really valuable for remote companies because it's a way to make your connection to people very clear, very tangible.
A visual, tangible commitment to your people.
Yeah.
It's also leading by example.
Yes, exactly. So what we hear from companies as a major motivator about why they would put a fund in place, the first thing people say is because it felt good and it was the right thing to do, right? The second thing is people tell the story that I told about how, it had a great employee who, but for a financial crisis, would still be a great employee, but, no longer is. And then people talk about retention.
Yes.
Engagement.
Retention.
Right? And I think retention, engagement in a remote environment, right? They're different challenges than they are in an in-person environment.
Well, I have a feeling you're going to have a great data set in about 5 years. So let me subscribe to that newsletter. I want to see that data report when it comes out. I tell you that.
Yeah, exactly. And I love this pointer to keep the remote versus in-person as a filter for that research. A lot of the folks that we are working with, they're remote and not in the way people typically, like when we think about remote, we usually think about me or you, like office workers basically. But an early adopter, like a segment that has been really strong for us has been home healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare is actually the largest sector of remote workers.
It is? Right. I'm so glad to know that, right? Because of all the home healthcare?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Medical transcriptionists, right?
Yes, exactly. So those folks, those group of companies have been early adopters of what we're doing here. And I think it's because they really understand that service matters. That's a remote job that's pretty hard, pretty lonely, and you need a lot of support to be able to keep doing it well.
Yeah, for sure. Rachel, could you possibly bestow upon us, this is Kaleem's favorite part of the show, a funny or inspiring moment that you experienced while working remotely?
I love this question so much. And I have the raft of noise in the background of the Zoom call that we all have. But I put this question actually out to my team. I was curious what other people have experienced.
Okay, I like that. Well
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
researcher in the
Well,
building.
and also, like anything else, let's have an active Slack conversation. That's necessary to the remote work culture.
Sure.
So one of my colleagues shared a story that is so funny. He was talking about a guy who he worked with for a long time, who would.
Well, hang on, let's
Yeah.
rewind a little bit. What type of company? Like I need to get a little.
Yeah, this is
into
a
it
software
here.
development firm. This is a bunch of tech workers, right?
Of course.
Coding.
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
And right, exactly, typing.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy would work from home most of the time. This is before we called remote, but was working from home 99% of the time, and would almost never turn his camera on, even for daily regular calls.
Yeah, why would
So,
you?
right, why? Why would you turn your camera on? So, at some point, they had a bunch of new people on the team. You can see where this is going, right? So somebody said, we really needed you to turn your camera on just to meet these new people on the team. He groaned. He said, "Okay, I've got to go put a shirt on." Right? Fine. Comes back, turns on his camera for 10 seconds, and then turns the camera off again and says, "Hold on, my girlfriend's naked too."
Awkward.
I don't understand. Like, bro, I don't understand, bro. You just told them hang on. Like, I don't understand the situation.
Right. Well, he turned his camera off. We're all naked here. We got to turn the cameras off.
So there's the answer as to why he didn't want his camera on ever.
Right. So now that's the problem. Like, now you're stuck with that knowledge forever on calls. With
Yeah.
Put your
Right?
nakedness away.
Don't share. Don't talk about it. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's
That was
so
one
great.
step over the line, fella.
1 second.
I know, right?
My girlfriend's naked. So it wasn't as if, he just turned it right back off and he's like, my girlfriend's naked. Come on, IT person. Come
Right.
on. We're better than that. I'm an IT person.
Yeah,
Kinda.
right? Yeah, I know.
Oh,
It's
man.
pretty funny.
Some people. What are you going to do?
Right?
Rachel, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on email. On LinkedIn, Rachel at Canary. You're ultimately going to find me. Or email is rachel@workwithcanary.com. That's our website, workwithcanary.com. You can find us there too.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I loved learning from you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. And I have to teach the little one a lot about savings. Now that, basically, you are a great human being, I have to do better. So I'm going to go teach. I'm going to start saving. We're going to start talking about money. I'm going to start doubling her investments. So thank you for sharing that wealth of knowledge.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for having me on. It was so fun to talk with both of you.
Awesome.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Peace. You've been listening to Remotely One. Visit us at remotelyone.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.